Yeah, I think we can. Oh, we're
I
recording.
did it. I pushed the button.
There we go. Um, so thank you so much for doing this
Of course.
as we're even just evolving, whatever this is.
I, it's we'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out
It's good
on our way.
conversation.
I think so. Yeah, I think if nothing else, it comes down to that. So maybe we could start with introducing ourselves. And would you mind starting?
Sure. My name is Janie Porche. I work in the communications office. Uh, my most visible work probably involves the day-to-day Bowdoin website care and feeding, but I also do a lot of thinking about how we communicate to alumni and parents and applicants and their families. So that's sometimes that's writing or design, sometimes that's photography or strategy, looking at how we're telling stories. Um, Probably the best part of my job is that like I'm on the part that's like all good news. Like, I don't really have to deal with any of the you know, angry folks calling because of construction. I get to deal with telling all the good stories.
Yes.
Oh, and
And
I've worked here for 2 years,
okay,
and I moved to Maine for this job.
great, thank you. And if you like, would you share your pronouns, your preferred
She,
pronouns?
her, hers, and I moved here from Chicago with my wife, Molly.
Thank you, Janie. And I'm Roland Mendiola. I work as a clinical psychologist and the interim director at Counseling and Wellness Services. And just to say a word about context for why we're doing this, basically it comes down to I think this time is ripe for an opportunity to, I think, talk about things that we don't always talk about very openly and publicly, including mental health specifically, and hearing maybe from people that we might not hear from about this topic typically. So just wanting to give some space and time to that, both in general, but I think specific to also the times we're living in. And I feel like I personally believe these kinds of things uh, feel really meaningful to talk about right now. So thanks again. And we can start with some of the questions I prepared. Um, so Janie, first question I have, did you grow up talking about mental or emotional health? And if so,
No.
how?
Um, I think that when I think about my upbringing, my family treated feelings and emotions as something really temporary or transient. And so were, when I was experiencing like grief or sadness, it was something to fix. Like, here's some ice cream, or go read a book.
Yeah, why not?
Um, here's a funny picture, right? Does that help? And it's sort of, and even the good ones, even the good emotions were, uh, it's sort of like we were trying to maintain like this stasis for whatever reason.
Hmm.
And so anything that was outside of that stasis was like something to be addressed or corrected. And so I did not learn to
And it
really,
deviated from the stasis and then quick
yeah.
return. Yeah.
I had a late night party conversation once about like, what would be your family's motto, and which is a great question. And mine is ultimately like uh, all things in moderation, like including joy, right? Like I don't, we
Like
don't
literally.
like,
Yeah.
yes. Like my family does not, we don't yell at each other. We also don't have like explosive moments of like pure joy that lasts.
Mm-hmm.
It's just everyone is very even keel. And I think um, because of that and because of this the way I was raised being like, it's something to solve. I never learned until much later really how to sit in my emotions and sit with what I'm feeling and understand that sometimes it's not something that I'm going to fix, and that I'm capable of learning some things by staying in that place.
Yeah.
But it's tough because I think my family's more like, snap out of it, right? Or it can't be that bad, or things. And sometimes they're saying that in a loving way, right? Like they're trying to say, other things are going great, right? But not really giving credit to the depth of feelings that I may be experiencing at any time. So I've had to work with that a lot in my own relationships. And, a lot in my family was kind of secretive, like, oh, well, did you hear about Aunt so-and-so?
Yeah.
I think she might be going to talk to somebody.
Right.
And, my family's from Texas. There may be like regional biases there around seeking help. But it was definitely something that was like outside of the norm. And so even just entering a relationship with a counselor who I talk to often, I don't talk to my family about that because they would say like, well, what's wrong? What's wrong with you? Are you okay? It's like, no, I'm great. This is a tool. This is something that's really helpful to me. So that's kind of, how I was raised around these conversations, which has been a challenge.
And it goes back to that initial point, I feel like, of anything that deviates from this sort of evenness, there must be something wrong.
Yeah.
And that's labeled as wrong. It's
right. And it's either like, get over it / it's not that bad, or will last forever if it's good, right?
Yeah. I think it's pointing at something that I don't always hear, but I think you're saying it really nicely. That like unspoken rule in a lot of families is that the expectation or rule is like evenness. Like we're just supposed to keep things like even or something.
Mm-hmm. And even now, it's tough to tell my family when I'm struggling with something, partly because it seems like they're just going to try and fix it, which doesn't work. Or I'm like, oh, am I bumming them out? Right? And because they're not really just able to listen to it as it is, which is tough.
Yeah. You started going into this, which, leads me to my next question, which is basically, how do you see these things now in your life? Emotional health, well-being, how do you typically tend to view them?
I see them a lot. It's something I've had to work on a lot of my relationships that, of course, I came like out of young adulthood into adulthood, and I took with me that like I should be able to fix when someone's hurting.
Gotcha.
And it sounds silly, but like I saw this little meme once. It was like 2 images. It was a Swiss Army knife and a $100 bill. It was like, if you can't fix it with either of these 2 things, then they probably just want you to listen. And that's so hard for me. Even, in my marriage, like if my wife is struggling with something and my immediate instinct is to say like, well, okay, stop right there. What can we change? What can we adjust? Like, what if we try this?
Right. Have you tried?
Yeah. And in some cases, she's like, first of all, I'm not even done talking. And secondly, I don't need you to fix it. Right. I just need you to hear it. And the other struggle with that I sort of realized only in the last maybe 5 years is that when you do something like that and you say like, well, I've got an idea. What if we tried this? Really, that's like centering me in the conversation. It turns that around and it makes it about what I can do and my agency and my ability to improve things.
And
And
typically, usually also like our level of comfort. It's like
yeah,
centering our own level of comfort. Yeah.
yeah. And so just really getting more comfortable. I don't want to say like that I'm like, I wallow in it, but I think some days that just understanding that there are days where nothing's going to really work. Like
Yeah.
today is September 24th.
Mm-hmm.
We are, as a nation, devastated by the ruling on Breonna Taylor, right? And like, there is a part of me that knew waking up this morning, like, well, I can't fix this by myself. And also, I don't want to ignore what I'm feeling about it. That it's too big to try to just kind of like push to the side. Um, it like implicates me and it makes me feel uncomfortable. And it's it's the right thing to do to feel that way.
Right.
And that's taken some time for me to get there.
And to stay in this place of like not wanting to do nothing, but knowing I can't do anything like necessarily, I don't know.
Like I can take actions,
Yeah, right.
right? And I do, and I try to think of those, but I'm talking about like that, you're awake at night, you're
Yes.
just scrolling,
Right.
and there's not really a meaningful action for me that I can take at that moment, but I can at least like stay in it.
Yeah.
And not try to, because even if I say like, oh, I'm going to pop open a new tab and I'm going to throw down a tweet, that's sort of trying to fix it.
Yeah.
It's another mechanism.
Would you say something, Janie, more explicitly about like what you've learned in your life? Like, what's the incentive of staying in it? Would you say?
I think part of it is the understanding that that there's an out. That I think even when it feels like it's going to last forever,
Yeah.
I think part of it is knowing, it's like knowing a strength that when you're in the middle of it, you don't think you have. And then when you get on the other side, you realize like, whew, okay, like, where did that take me? What did I get from this? And the other thing that I think is, it's also like how you gain the empathy to be there when someone else is experiencing it.
That's right. Yeah.
So, to be able to say, I too feel helpless is tough, but it's also like really good to hear.
Yeah. Right.
So that's kind of where it doesn't always, it's always practice, right?
Absolutely. It reminds me in counseling, sometimes we talk about this, I think, in the language of like trusting our emotional process.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know where it's going to go necessarily.
Scary.
Yeah. Is there anything else you would say, Janie, about who you are, or where you come from informs your views, feelings, thoughts about mental health?
Like I said, I'm originally from Texas. My family and I do not agree on a lot of stuff, and we're not particularly close. And when we have conversations, it's like something about the weather, something delicious,
Yeah.
and like a status update on every family member's health, physical health, right?
Right.
And there are so many topics and conversations that are important to my values that I have tried and failed. Sometimes tried and made a little dent, but it's tough.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time it has pretty bad results.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's sad. It is a little sad, but it's also made me create the community of
Hmm.
people in my life who share the things that I value and understand, where I can admit that I'm hurting or that I'm struggling or that things are going really well, right? Like
Yeah.
that the value of creating a family, or I'm not going to say pod, it's a pandemic word, right? Um, is so valuable. And I think if there are people who feel isolated from or different than their family, it's lonely. And it's tough. I remember the day of the Women's March um, in January of 2017. It
Yeah.
was one of the most beautiful days. And in Chicago, it happened to be like 65 degrees in January. The sun was out. It was perfect. And just watching like hundreds of thousands of people, and there's like grandmothers and babies. And I had this profound sadness knowing that like my family will never be there with me. Right. And just like how that sort of hit me and realizing that. And then being there, realizing like, but look how many people are. Right.
Right.
And so I think there is a part of where I'm from that informs reluctance to talk about some of these things. And then there's a part of where I'm from that like directly informs thoughts about policy or, structural problem. But what I've gained from that is to find the people in your life and make them your family. And you can take that to whatever degree you want, right? Like that can be a relationship that you lean on when you need it and it supplements what you have. It may be more than that. But it's beautiful and it's real. And so that has been, 25, 30 years of
Yeah.
navigating that and my guilt around it and all these things, right?
Yeah. So
Um,
like,
so yeah, that's a pretty big part of where I'm from, whether I like it or not.
yeah. Can I ask if you want to say anything about it? What is it like talking about some of these things? Do you have any reaction?
Talking with you or talking with my family?
Talking with me about
Yeah.
them?
Um, I feel, I feel like tremendous guilt often. I feel like you and I were talking about like the coronavirus has been this excuse for me not to visit. And I feel guilty about that, but I don't want to go. Right. And every item on the news is like another thing I don't want to talk about with my family. Um, and that's some days that is overwhelming. And, sometimes like when I talk to friends whose families are kind of on their same wavelength, that's its own kind of loneliness.
Yeah, sure.
Um, but I also like recently had a chat with a friend whose father passed away,
Hmm.
and she spoke about some regret, the things that she wished she tried harder at, and like that's tough.
Right.
And like I know that like I have love for them and they have love for me. But also if we were just in the world, like we wouldn't be friends, right? And that's such a strange thing
Yeah.
to understand as an adult. And some people are like, my mom's my best friend. I'm like, wow, that is not true for me. Um,
That happens.
and so I do feel some guilt around that. But I also know like that I'm not alone in it, certainly. And maybe the guilt kind of keeps a few of the threads connected. It's not like I hang up on them when they call.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that I do understand the things they've done for me and like their role in my life. And
Yeah.
family's tough. Family's really tough. It's tough right now.
Yeah.
This year, it's really tough.
Well, as you're talking about it, I mean, my personal sense is that maybe not just obvious, but it feels obvious that it's not just yours. I mean, I feel like we continually get this message in our life that our relationships should look a certain way, of all kinds, but in a way, particularly family. There are some
Yeah.
ideas that we're imagining.
Over the summer, these kind of extended, deeper conversations about anti-racism, as those were unfolding and listening, where like half of what I'm listening to is saying, there are people in your life who you need to cut free because there may be people in your life, right, who will refuse to even consider some of these ideas.
Yep.
And the other half of the conversation is like, you need to go to Thanksgiving, you need to look in their faces, you need to tell them this, right? And like these two messages of like, self-care, protect yourself,
Right.
prepare for the conversations that will advance these topics, and then
Right.
like get in there.
Boundaries. Yeah.
It's your job to take your Uncle Jimmy and figure out what you can do with him.
Right.
That's I haven't solved that. I don't know what I'm doing for Thanksgiving.
Yeah. I think that's another perfect example of staying in the middle ground of that. And,
Maybe that's safe. Maybe that's a safe choice I'm making. I don't know.
I don't know. At the very least, it sounds like not rushing to impulsively decide on that. Those are big decisions, I think, for most of us. A lot of what you're saying, too, goes to my next question, which just, I think, considers mental health as one of these ongoing elephants in the room, I think, generally speaking, in a lot of our worlds and in society in general. Any other kinds of elephants in the room for you, Janie, that feel especially salient to you, your life, to the world we live in today? I think you're already naming a few, but anything else you?
Yeah, I think one that it's like the word I was going to use is money, but I think I mean class. This feels like an elephant in the room in a lot of different rooms, right? It's present with family, it's present at work, it's present, I know, with students, and it's in our day-to-day interactions. And I think that I don't know what to do about it. I don't know where to put it, and I don't know how to fix it as a fixin', right? But I think it's just, and of course, like class is an umbrella that covers so much. It covers finance, it covers upbringing, it covers your family's relationship to money, and work ethic, and all these things that get really tangled in, where you see yourself in our society. And I think that's a really big one, and it's also really tough to talk about.
Really personal.
Yeah. I just read the book Citizen by Claudia Rankine, right? And it's she describes these like relentless microaggressions that she goes through day after day after day. And this book was incredible and like terrifying to me, because it made me think more about what are the things that I've done in the world, right? That whether through ignorance or good intention, right? And most of these, so it made me put a sharper focus on myself around like my body language and my speech about, as those things relate to race, but I also think about those things as they relate to class. And, the small things, and I've talked to students about this, that, the way that comes up, and we don't pretend, but there's certainly the idea that like everybody gets here and everybody's on the meal plan and everybody's in this kind of room and everybody's taking these classes. But that never goes away. Class doesn't go away, and it shows up all the time. and it's really, really stressful. So that's probably a big one. I think another one is like, maybe it's more talked about, maybe it's not an elephant, um, is like broadcasting perfection.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I know that there's been a lot of even scholarship on this, but I had a funny conversation with a friend. Um, she makes like the best Instagram stories ever. They're so funny.
Mm-hmm.
Like um, things, just like little things that she's doing in her day, and they're like going right or they're going wrong, and her humor is so present. And when you look at her profile itself, there's all these like beautiful images. And she's like, well, I don't want that like silly stuff to muck up my profile. She's thinking about this presentation. And so she's kind of like hiding the parts that are like funny or questioning or worried because they don't have the gloss.
Yeah.
And then it's sort of like, well, who are you doing that for? Those, is someone going to like come along and look at your profile and be like, this person only loves the most beautiful stuff. That's who I want to follow. And then they're going to see your goofy stuff, and just like, I don't know where to put that, but I know that it's lonely shit, right?
Yeah.
And sort of watching what we broadcast and how we put ourselves out there, I think is a big part of mental health. And I think young people today are, I don't want to generalize, but I think they have more conversations about this earlier in terms of like whether they're struggling or they have anxiety or they're, dealing with like overwhelming depression or grief. And I think they have the conversational tools, but I still think the pressure is on for what you perform and even how you perform your struggle. And I don't know what to do about that either, but I think that's a pretty big one.
I'd agree with you. I think certainly younger generations, I feel like, have come to terms with admitting and acknowledging the problem, the problems that they struggle with. And I also feel like there's still typically, in my experience, generally speaking, a mentality of the same that we're still talking about, of like, we're still seeing it as something wrong. That we're still admitting that there's like these things, but there's something wrong with that and that they need to be fixed.
Right.
I think that's still a very prevalent mentality.
Yeah. That it's like a deviation from the norm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that's a super appropriate image of like, only if you see me in these like ideal ways will I show you, or you'll get to see these other ways that I think about things, or
right,
more nuanced kinds of views or opinions that I have.
And so the things about you that are like the most vulnerable or approachable, this funny, you drop your spaghetti on the floor and it was a bad day, so you cried about it. That's a lot more relatable, at least to me, than like the vista that you saw.
Yeah, right.
And so like, why this need to sort of maintain the inner and the outer?
Yeah.
And whether it's like inner you, outer you, or like inner circle, outer circle, I don't know, but there's a lot to it. It seems tiring.
I have one more question. This is great. I really appreciate everything you're bringing to this, Janie. From your own experience, what kind of message feels important for students to get about how to cope with the times we're living in today?
I think I have two. One is like more immediate. One is maybe like a little bit down the road.
Perfect.
The first one is not to feel trapped or influenced by how other people address their own needs. And like my example of this, so I've been diagnosed and treated for ADD as long as I've been an adult. And right when the pandemic started, it's like what you need is this breathing app.
Right.
And like, I don't need the breathing app. It doesn't work, right? And then it'd be like, well, okay, what you need is like 10 quick yoga poses to help you achieve mindfulness. I'm like, my mind is full and this isn't working.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to be like, what's wrong with me?
Right. That they're not working, you mean?
Right.
Yeah.
And like, well, first of all, we don't know that they're working for other people either, right? That might be part of the performance.
Sometimes they do. Sometimes they do.
And sometimes they may be really, really effective.
That's right.
But don't feel like, don't get mad at yourself.
Yes.
If you're trying a few different things to handle what's going on inside of you.
And it's not your thing. Yeah. Right.
You have to like give yourself, you have to be like gracious and patient with yourself. Like some of the stuff we're dealing with right now, you've never dealt with before, and there's not one answer.
Mm-hmm.
And like feeling guilty about it or feeling like you're bad at it.
We probably don't even have one answer.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if it's, even if it's your best friend, you feel like, this is my best friend. Why is it the same thing that works for them doesn't work for me? So I think, being patient with yourself and also forgiving. And I think, think about when I try to imagine like making space or time for myself. Like I don't think about like where would I go for a month to escape, right? Like where would I go? I actually think about like if I had 2 hours and I'm right here, what's the thing I can do that will make me feel the best for 2 hours with what's around me? And sometimes that's Super Mario Brothers. And sometimes it's nachos. And sometimes that's walking the dog. And other times it's eating or sleeping or trying not to scroll something on the internet. Or even just like making my space better, right?
Yeah.
Like figuring out my physical surroundings. And that if that's what I need, then none of those are better or worse than the others. And you may not need to broadcast that, like what's working for you and what's not, that's up to you. So I think in these, like right now, everyone's trying to throw stuff at us. Like, you should try this. This is like the cure-all for working from home. This is like the chair that you need. This is the lavender oil that you need. This is the record you should be listening to. And don't get trapped by that. Find the thing that makes you feel calm in the next 2 hours. And then my second message, actually this comes from a conversation I was having recently. I was talking with an attorney, an educator, and another person who works at the college. And we started having a funny conversation. I think it started with like, have you ever been fired from a job? Right. And then it sort of went into like, what's the worst job you've ever done? What's the job you would totally do again if, money and space, whatever, were no object? And, what's the job that you worked the hardest at, right? And in this conversation, the things that we talked about, I worked at a crab restaurant, right? And then I had this incredible boss, and then it was amazing because this and this. And like, I washed boats for a while. I worked at a wood shop that cut out little shapes to make toys for birds, right? Somebody out, like, I was doing catering. I was cleaning like super rich people's houses in the summer. And then they also asked me to cook meals for them, and I had to figure that out on the fly. And what I got from that is just like the remembering when you're in college, the pressure you feel that you have to find it, you have to find the right thing, and you have to find it right away. And,
Yeah.
you know, all of us in this conversation love our jobs, love our life, and didn't start doing that right away.
Mm-mm.
And there was just something about this, like to hear these really accomplished people, you know, this like successful attorney saying, when I was at the crab restaurant, we would like shovel the crabs, and the just understanding that it's not a straight line. The narrative isn't a straight line, right? Because while you're at the crab restaurant, you're also studying for the LSAT, or while you're doing catering, you might be looking at programs to get back into teaching, right? And so this pressure that people put on themselves, and I know it, and it's very real, and I know that it comes from um, finance, it comes from class, right? It comes from family. It kind of comes from a lot of these things that we've talked about. Um, but if you ask the people in your life who are happy doing what they're doing, I will guarantee they haven't been doing it for their whole lives. And that I don't know if that's reassuring, right, to hear. I
Yeah.
know many people are thinking like, I hope I'm not washing boats. I was washing boats after graduate school. And one thing led to another, right? And I learned some things and I met some people and then this happened and then this happened. And that's normal and that it's like a beautiful way to build a life. But it won't be something you can predict right now.
Right.
And like the future is weird right now.
Super weird.
It is.
And the future is weird anyway.
It is. It's
most
usually weird.
Yeah.
But it's, it feels tenuous and it feels even more like it's not always ours to control. Maybe it never has been, right? But this, I guess I would encourage students to like, when you imagine some future version of you, think about the person you want to be. Do you have like a big group of friends? Are you like a small group person? Are you writing? Are you interested in music? How do you find space and time for yourself? Where do you see the natural surroundings? Where do you imagine?
Yeah.
You don't think about like what you're gonna do, what you're gonna be,
right?
Because you're gonna get there.
Yeah.
And what you have the opportunity to do is build the person, like strengthen the person you are, to be better and better as you get towards that. And just sort of hearing these amazing professionals in my life, and all of us are talking about things we got fired from, and driving a golf cart, snacks, and swim lessons, and all these things that ended up coming together to build these lives of satisfaction and community.
Mm-hmm.
That's my advice.
Yeah.
Wash boats. Or it's okay if you do.
Right. It's okay to wash boats and imagine who you want to be and the kind of life you want to live. Not necessarily the specific thing you're going to be.
Not a job title.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I didn't have any idea a job like mine existed. I don't sometimes wonder, does it, right? Like, my job is like strange and fun and creative and builds me space in this community. I would never have known that it existed when I was starting out and that it would have been the right thing for me to be doing. And if I focused on this job title, we don't know everything that's out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you're saying too just speaks to me of like how we just don't know like what is going to shape us, let alone like the things in our life that will actually end up feeling quite memorable and meaningful, sort of no matter what it is.
Right.
We just don't know those things.
Like what you'll take from
right.
a really short experience that at the time you're like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
you build on that, or that's where it splits, and like it could have gone one way or the other.
Yeah.
And there's too much pressure already. You know, if you are, we're talking about like understanding your own mental health and your own wellness and your emotional well-being.
Yeah.
And to imagine right now that you're going to know exactly where you're headed.
Yeah.
I can see how that's comforting sometimes. It's kind of like fixing it, right? But we don't know. And that's, you know, all I'm telling you is like, that's okay.
Yeah.
And that you are preparing yourself to be ready by being open to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why, I mean, this is exactly why I want to be having these kind of conversations, because yes, mental health is about coping, like learning how to cope well with life. But it's also, or part of that is also sometimes asking some of these impossible questions. And I think the times we're living in are kind of forcing us to look at these questions that can't be answered very easily, in terms of like what kind of life are we actually trying to build here, or you know,
Like where am I best used?
yeah, yeah. What do I actually believe in?
Yeah.
Some
What
basic.
am I fighting for?
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
Either forcing us to answer these things ourselves, or maybe look to other people to get some ideas and inspiration from, you know. But I think we need some time to do this kind of thing.
Well, I'm always happy to talk to anybody. Uh,
Thank
if
you for that.
you're if your family's weird, or you have ADD, or you want to wash boats, or you don't want to wash boats. Um,
For saying that, and thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah.
I'm glad to be here.